Hi, my name is Jack, founder of posterspy.com, and welcome to another Let's Talk Art video. This time we're in Utrecht, Netherlands to chat to Leon Tukker, a concept artist and illustrator known for his sci-fi and environment art. So Leon, thank you so much for joining me on the Let's Talk Art series. For anybody unfamiliar with your work who's watching this, how would you best describe what you do and who you are?
All right, so thank you for having me. I'm a freelance concept artist and I often do concept animation as well in 3D. Next to that, I do a lot of illustration work for movies, video games, board games, for example. And I would describe my work as being science fiction. There's a lot of sci-fi in my work, and I try to put emphasis on scale and on color, so I really love colorful stuff. So as opposed to the very dark and bleak science fiction vision that we often see, I try to go the other way and introduce more vibrant colors to my work.
And you came into art quite late in your life, like
Yeah.
it's something that you didn't do from a very young age.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say it's been easier for you, or has that made things more difficult? How has your experience been picking up art and making it your career?
Yeah, for me, it has been a very smooth ride, if I have to be very honest, because, yeah, like you said, I transitioned into art quite late. I mean, some might not call it late. It was 19 years old. As opposed to people that draw from when they're 6 years old. It might seem quite late. But the thing is that I started doing art out of boredom and out of, I don't know what to do. I'll just try and do this, try and work in 3D programs and Photoshop. But because I was doing it because it was fun, I didn't have a career goal in mind. So I was just like chugging on and trying to come up with new stuff without having that I need to work there or I need to be in that movie or whatever. So the ride was pretty smooth for me.
And you've mentioned that you never really created because you wanted to make money, or like you said, you didn't really want to go for a certain job or to be successful. You just wanted to do it for fun.
Yeah.
Now, do you think that that's really helped you in your career?
Absolutely. It's still my biggest motivation, that it is fun. So usually when I take on work, I don't do it unless I think it's incredible fun to work on the project. And it's always been a big drive for me. So I tend to get distracted a lot. But as long as I'm really having fun with what I'm doing, I tend to get really invested.
Kind of building onto that, have you ever been offered a job that's offered to pay you a lot of money, but you've looked at it and gone, well, this isn't going to be fun, so I don't want it?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. So my mindset is that I'd rather do work for myself and learn a lot and make work that pushes me towards where I want to be. Versus work that pays me a lot of money, but is the entire opposite direction. Like they want me to create portraits while I'm actually very bad at portraits, even though they would pay me a lot of a lot of money.
And you said that you want to go in a certain direction. You yourself have your own goals. Where do you want to be? Where can you see yourself in like a couple of years?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I was talking about goals, but I'm just like, people talk about having goals, and some of them are very focused on, I want to work there and I want to work there. I think a goal of mine is that I want to at one point make a living with the art that I want to make. So maybe make a book or write a book. But what I often say to people when they want to work at a specific company is, don't forget to enjoy the ride, right? You're trying to get where you want to be, but maybe you'll find nice other jobs or other opportunities along the way. So, don't forget to enjoy that.
So you mentioned that you didn't really start doing any art until you were about 19.
Yeah, that's right.
So what pushed you to that? What was that kind of creative urge inside you?
All right, so as a kid, my dad loves sci-fi. Like we had a lot of comic books, and I started watching Star Wars when I was 6 years old, for example. So I kind of grew up with all of these sci-fi stuff happening around me. And what else is that I played with a lot of Legos as a kid, like being able to create your own world. I think, come to think of it, that's what really pushed me towards the creative industry, because I really loved playing with Legos. I played it probably until I was 16. I was still with bricks on the floor, trying not to step into them, of course, and trying to come up with new things, with new vehicles, with new worlds. And then at one point I found out that you could do it without Legos and maybe even turn it into a career.
So you mentioned that a lot of your work revolves around the world of science fiction. And you've created so many different pieces. How do you make each one unique and fresh and just different from the last? Because surely it can be quite difficult to keep reinventing the same kind of atmosphere and the same kind of energy.
Oh, that's a really good question. So a lot of people ask me, like, Leon, you've been kind of doing the same stuff all over and over again. It's kind of a niche because the creative industry is pretty big. You can do anything from, you know, characters to buildings to vehicles. And I kind of got stuck in this whole science fiction environment kind of thing. But it actually gave me a lot of opportunities and jobs, because within that small niche, within that small, you know, corner of the industry, there is so much, you know, way to maneuver yourself in. And what I do, since I use a lot of 3D, I try to, you know, find new functions or, you know, new bits of software that can help me come up with new shapes. Sometimes I just, when I'm bored, I just sit down and, you know, push a few buttons and try to push and pull a few shapes, and then something I've never seen before comes up. And you turn it into a whole, you know, a whole new painting. Or maybe you watch a nature documentary and you see a coral reef, for example, in a video, maybe Planet Earth. And you're like, I'm going to build a city around that. That's going to be great. So there's so much things in the real world that you can draw inspiration from. And you can then apply it to your own little corner, like I said. So for me, there's an infinite world yet to discover, basically.
So would you say it's quite important to consume a lot of information and imagery to help this kind of career?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's really good to look around you, maybe, you know, travel a lot, see new cultures, and, you know, try new foods for all I care. And, you know, maybe take some nice photos, and even in the smallest shapes, like even like put a leaf under a microscope, you can see new worlds unfold. There's so much to discover.
It's so interesting to listen to how, you know, passionate you are about environments and architecture. Is that something you've always had, or is that developed within your career?
I think the passion for sci-fi was always there, but then lately, I think in the past year and a half, it evolved more towards cityscapes and architecture. Ever since I was on a train station in Belgium, in the city of Liège. They have a train station designed by Santiago Calatrava. He's a Spanish architect, very famous. And I was standing there, and it was so overwhelming. I was like, wow, that's so interesting. And then I looked at it, and where did he base his architecture on? And he actually based it on the human body, which is a whole different, you know, a whole other world. Like the station was based on the eye and the eyelashes, for example, which is, you know, it's really cool, come to think of it, how many layers there are to, designing that. So, and since I was already kind of working with natural environments, and I was already interested in seeing cities and, you know, the cities in Star Wars and all these kind of movies, I just gradually, you know, went towards that.
So you say as well that your work is so inspired by all of these different people. Mm-hmm. Is there any direction you really want to take your work in particular? Any kind of new styles you want to apply or things you want to try? Definitely.
So, yeah, I was talking about having a niche, that I am working in this very specific corner of the industry, and that is science fiction environments or big cityscapes, whether it be fantasy or science fiction. But what I actually want to do is create these very intricate scenes. So imagine, for example, like a marketplace which has like 20 or 25 individual characters trying to sell each other wares and, you know, interacting with each other. I love seeing these like densely populated images with, of course, architecture and environments in the background, but with more of a story going on. But the downside of having a niche like science fiction environments is that I didn't have too much time, or I didn't focus too much on creating characters or focus on creating anatomy or, you know, anatomically correct people. So that's something I would really like to learn in the future.
And you mentioned that, you know, this industry is really competitive, and it's hugely competitive. Yeah. How would you say you managed to kind of get in?
Yeah, so I think, you know, getting into the industry has a lot to do with outreach, like, and network. So what I did when I just started out, I started posting my images on Facebook and on you know, other sites like DeviantArt, for example. Not because I thought my art was good, on the contrary, but just because I wanted to show people what I was working on. And that actually, like, so very slowly I started building up kind of a following, very small, and that slowly gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So I have been doing that over the past 8 years, unconsciously, just because I wanted to let my mother know that I wasn't living under a bridge, right? So yeah, I think about that. And then the other thing is, because you can call it tunnel vision or a one-track mind, but I was kind of focused on this one aspect of the industry, right, which was science fiction environments. And that way I was able to develop a style which became pretty recognizable. And that way clients came to me for the work that I do.
You post a lot of your stuff on ArtStation.
Yeah.
And you've actually entered a few of their competitions and stuff. Would you say that they've been useful for you?
Oh yeah, that has been a great influence. I think because when I was just done with art school, I actually went to theater design school, which has nothing to do with the work I'm doing now. That's interesting. Yeah, just when I got out of school, I started posting on ArtStation, because around that time ArtStation just released, got out there. So it's the same what I was saying about posting on social media from day one. I started posting on ArtStation on day one, so you slowly start gathering a following there as well, and like slowly you get a bigger body of work there. And then the ArtStation challenges were like a perfect opportunity to compete, but in a very friendly way, because everyone was just helping each other out and giving each other feedback. There was no competitiveness like, oh, that guy has more likes than me, I need to beat him, I need to post more. It was just, you're all working towards kind of the same goal, because there's, when you're doing a competition, they have like a brief, like ancient civilizations or futuristic worlds, for example. And the cool thing is that everyone has a different background, like they grew up differently as a kid, they have different inspirations. So even though the brief is the same, you get all these different angles to that brief, and you get like a whole body of like immensely different and creative work.
So would you say that having your work online in that kind of environment gets clients to contact you more often?
Absolutely. Actually, most of the clients that I get contact me through ArtStation, because it's such a centralized area. Everyone is on there nowadays, especially in the digital art industry, or people working towards games or movies or board games, for example. I think traditional artists might still have their own personal side, but for people like me, it's fantastic.
So a lot of people when they're young are really stuck on what to do and don't really know what path they want to go in. Was there ever like a sort of game-changing moment for you?
I was one of these kids, I didn't know at all what to do. I knew I was kind of creative because all the Lego stuff, and I did draw a little bit, and I painted Warhammer figurines, and I liked video games, I knew that. So when I was 17, I went into commercial design school. I hated it, I absolutely hated it, and people didn't like me either. So, I mean, it's figures. But there was this one guy, and like he definitely changed my life. Probably he doesn't even know he did, but I was having a miserable time right there. It wasn't that bad, but I didn't know what to do. I was failing classes, I was skipping classes. But there was this guy, and he was showing me Cinema 4D. Cinema 4D? Well, what's that? I was like, and he was like, yeah, this 3D software, you can make stuff. I didn't know what 3D software was. I was 17 or 18. I didn't know what it was. And he showed it to me, and he was making these beautiful abstract worlds. And I was like, I want that. And maybe I can make spaceships with this. And I started trying it, pushing buttons. And then I was like, I can make spaceships with this. And then on the other moment, I was like, this feels like playing with Legos. And I instantly felt like a kid again. And that's actually still what drives me up until this day, like feeling like a kid and just playing around within that 3D software, because to me it just feels so much like playing with Legos, grabbing a cube and just turning it into your whole world, and then coming up with stories around it, and creating little characters that inhabit your cities and stuff like that. So I think that guy really changed, really got me into this industry without him probably even knowing it.
So you mentioned how you work in 3D and Photoshop together,
yeah.
So you blend those two styles. Is there any reason that you started doing that? Is there a reason that you started experimenting within Photoshop?
Oh, definitely. So the first part is probably the aesthetic bit. I love working in 3D, but I don't really like the tight edges and angles it comes with. So I usually try to hide it in 2D. And I don't know why I actually started 2D. I think it was kind of a hunch. I was making all these nice spaceships, but I was always appealed to the more like 2D side, like those environment arts, like in Guild Wars, for example, the games like that. So that's when I bought a graphics tablet and started, you know, trying some Photoshop. And then gradually I developed this workflow in where I would always start in 3D, experiment in that, and then bring it into Photoshop. The downside of that is that over the years I kind of got stuck into that workflow. I always kind of do the same thing. And it's sometimes pretty hard if you have a comfort zone to break out of that. But there was, I once talked to a great artist, Craig Mullins. I think he is actually the artist who invented digital painting. And I once got a portfolio review from him, which was like very interesting and like probably also like very life-changing for me. And he said, all right, Leon, it's cool that you're using this 3D. And it's nice that you figured out the composition and the lighting and your perspective in 3D. But don't be afraid to, you know, keep the experiment going when you're in 2D. Don't only use Photoshop to, you know, clean up some bits or make it look more painterly. Just make sure to copy some bits from the render, you know, rotate it around and scale it around and see if you can come up with new things. Just keep your entire workflow creative and don't let the 3D render be the boss of you. Don't be that guy who, you know, gets an image from the computer and does exactly what the image tells you to do. It's almost like tracing over, you know, over someone else's painting, right? Only I did the thing myself. So that's when I started experimenting in 2D more. So maybe adding interesting photo textures or grabbing bits and pieces of my painting and copying that around. Or, which is one of my favorite tools that I would like to briefly cover, is the mixer brush. And the mixer brush in Photoshop allows you to sample bits and pieces of your painting and use that as a brush, as opposed to the clone stamp tool, which just copies bits and pieces of your painting. Now you can actually turn it into a brush and, like, you know, you have a piece of mountain here and, you know, you sample it and then you paint more mountain there, and it's beautiful. It really works, yeah, it works like a charm.
And one thing, you know, you're talking about experimenting and changing your workflow. One thing you've started to do is work within the world of VR.
Yes.
So how does that work?
Oh man, that stuff is life-changing. Oh, another life-changing thing. It's so VR is a thing that came up in the past, I don't know, year, maybe 2 years. It's still a very recent thing, but it quickly is starting to become an industry standard, where Hollywood studios are actually doing all of their modeling or all of their design work in VR. And I was kind of pressured into buying one. I was like, should I? It might be weird. So I just bought one, and I was so amazed on how intuitive it is. Like, you're wearing like one of these headsets, right? You have these two controllers, and it feels like you're just sculpting. You just make gestures and you come up with new worlds. Because I was talking about how I use 3D software to create my images. The downside of that is that there is always a screen between you and what you're making. So there's kind of a medium that it's not necessarily blocking your creativity, but it's, you know, you have to translate what's in your head into something that appears on your screen. But VR removes that barrier. It's like drawing on paper again. There's nothing stopping you from making what you want to make. There's no hotkeys. There's no hardware stuff that keeps you from, making the stuff you want to make. So actually, I spent most of my mornings in VR space trying to come up with new pieces of architecture or little spaceships. And yeah, you know, because I typically use sculpting software, so what happens is that I model most of my 3D models and most of my buildings in VR, and then I export it back into my 3D software, and then I finish the whole scene up there. And it's a very nice workflow between, on one side VR, on the other side 3D, and then Photoshop and painting, digital painting, to finish it and turn it into a final illustration. And what VR also does, it's insanely fast. It cuts so much time. Especially when you're trying to make a car, for example. If you want to make an accurate car, it would cost you like 3 days. And with VR, you can just like, ooh, do a shape here, do a wheel there, and you're done, you have a car. It's so fast.
And would you say that VR would be like the future? Do you think it's going to be the future of 3D design?
Yeah, absolutely. I think people are still arguing or maybe doubting, but especially for the people watching, I would say like at least try it once. If a friend or yeah, someone you know has a set, just try it, and I'm pretty sure in 10 minutes you'll pick it up and you'll make crazy stuff. It's so intuitive that you can learn it in a day. So I've been using it for my professional work, so for clients. After one day of practice, I could already find a way of implementing it into my day-to-day workflow, and use it to make projects.
So you mentioned earlier on that you got into the 3D world quite late on and started out, about 19. Is there any advice you would give people up and coming or people that want to get into this industry?
Definitely, there's a whole bunch of things. First one is take your time. Definitely, I hear a lot of people saying like, "Oh, I work for 16 hours a day to get where I am right now." I'm not sure if that's true. Like, I feel it's important that it doesn't matter when you break into the industry. It doesn't matter if you're a 16-year-old like prodigy or if you are 40. As long as you're having fun and really do what you want to what you want to do. The other thing is, try to find your voice. For me, I got very lucky that I have a very one-track mind and found my niche in this industry, and quickly came to a very specialized style. So a good important thing to ask yourself is, what story do I want to tell? Where do I want to be? And then maybe look at, what was my childhood like? What did I like as a kid? Or what inspirations do I have right now? So I see a lot of people, they want to be like, this famous concept artist or this lady that makes beautiful illustrations. But I'm like, why do you want to be like them? Like, it's really good that you reference their art or maybe look at what they're doing or the decisions that you're making. But you're not telling, if you're copying their work, you're not telling your story, you're telling their story. And they already told it, so why should you tell it, right? So really think about, what is my story, and maybe what can I learn from looking at this artist, or what can I learn from the techniques that other artist used. So that's that's interesting. And the last and most important thing is have fun. That's for me. I mean, for me, it's a big drive. For some more ambitious people, it might be ambition or getting to that goal. But for me, it's all about having fun, and I feel. Yeah, especially in this day and age where burnouts are more common because the industry is more and more demanding. Not necessarily the art industry, every industry is getting more and more demanding. So, listen to yourself, listen to your body, and when you don't feel like drawing, just don't draw, and do some sports for a bit and think about what could be your next drawing. Yeah, stuff like that.
So as a freelancer, you work from home, and is that difficult? Do you find that okay working in the same room that you sleep, or have you found that difficult? Is there something you do to combat that feeling of always being in a work-sleep environment?
Very, very good question. I've been working as a freelancer for 3 years now, and I feel like it tends to get quite lonely, right? My girlfriend is out to work for for the entire day, and I'm just sitting here by myself, and the pets, of course. And the other downside about freelancing is that you're always busy with your work. If I would work in a studio, I just wake up, go to the studio, work, get back, and work on my own stuff. But now, I'm always thinking about work. What should I do tomorrow? Oh man, I forgot to do something an hour ago. I still need to do it. I need to do my finances. There's so much. So in order to stay sane, I tend to still do a lot of sports. I still do the high jump, actually. I'm not really able to do it that much because of injuries, which is unfortunate, but I mean, not really, as long as I'm having fun doing it. But the most important thing is that it really helps me clear my mind, because creative work, you kind of tend to work with your head, right? You think about design, you think about decisions you're making, and then if you do some physical exercise, you don't have to think about all that.
So you recently did an illustration for an upcoming RPG that you posted on your ArtStation account. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Of course we can, definitely, I'd love to.
So this piece for Noaden Chronicles, how did that get started?
So the client, they are a lovely couple from America, and they contacted me through ArtStation, and they wanted me to create kind of a city or kind of a centerfold image for their role-playing game they were releasing called Nuaden Chronicles.
So when they got in touch, did they want a specific style or look, or what did they really want you to go for?
So usually when I get hired for the specific style I do. I guess I'm kind of known for doing these gigantic cityscapes where scale is has a very important part to play. So usually, yeah, when I get hired, like I said, they want me to work in exactly the style I'm already working in. So that's very, very comfortable. But they had a very specific piece in mind. Of course, they were writing a story for their world they were building. So I had a lot of information to actually work with when I got started.
So when they contacted you then, did they give you a piece of yours that you'd already done? They said, can you create something like this? Or did they give you like a mood board? How did that typically work?
Usually, yeah, when a client contacts me, they usually inquire about how long did this piece you did, how long did that take you, or how much would you ask for, something like that. And for the specific piece we're talking about right now, they didn't have something in mind of my own work, because usually my work is kind of science fiction, and they had more of a fantasy city in mind. But they did have a gigantic mood board. They had some sketches they already made. They had, of course, the whole story lying around. So yeah, plenty of information for me to work with.
And once you had some ideas, how then did you translate that to a real final image?
So I started doing some very simple sketches on paper using some watercolors. I usually don't even show that to clients. It's just for myself. You know, I make some notes, I write some things down. And then I do the rest of my sketching process. I already do it in 3D. And the good thing for me with this project was that the client provided me with like a map. This is where the financial district is supposed to be. This is where the river is. This is where the farms are. So I just had to take that information, jump into 3D, and get started with the outline. This is where the wall is supposed to be. You kind of treat it like working with a box of Legos. You pick a little brick and you copy it, and you can't really copy bricks in real life. But, in 3D you can, of course. So you just start with a simple building and then see how does this look, and maybe with the lighting this looks really cool. You're just figuring out the composition while you're building the entire city, and that's like the fun way about working in 3D.
So you said as well that they told you where the financial district was, where the farming bits were. So when you actually create that in 3D, do you have to go away and do some research and see what you want to do in like a sci-fi or fantasy environment, or do you just kind of go crazy and just go straight into it?
Yeah, usually I just start by looking for shapes and looking for things. The information I got is that it was supposed to be in a crater of like a dormant volcano, so I got that much information to work with. So I looked at pictures from Iceland, for example, like how does the grass look like around a volcano like that, or how does a river work. They were telling me about a citadel, which was supposed to have this ivory kind of color, like a marble type of thing. So I looked up images of marble structures or marble floors, and then I just started working. I drew a little map myself, where all the districts are supposed to be, because I have a very specific workflow. I use a tool called the Octane scatter tool, and what that is that it allows me to create some small buildings. So I created those in 3D, some little initial blockouts. And then the Octane scatter tool allows me to scatter them over a surface that, I have a surface, and I tell Octane, scatter this building all over that surface. And it is a very intuitive process. If I change the surface, the city instantly changes as well. So I just have to push and pull some shapes, and the entire layout just changes. So it's a very nice and intuitive workflow, and you get instant feedback of what you just changed, because the Octane render renders all of the stuff in real time. So I'm just planning this city while I'm working on it, and it's a very rewarding and fun way of working. Because most people think of 3D software like, oh, that's so hard, you need to know maps and stuff like that. But you can actually use it in a very creative and experimental way, and that's how I like to do it. For me, having fun is the most important aspect of doing a piece like that.
So in terms of this piece, obviously there can be creative differences with clients and issues along the way, whether or not they have a different vision. How was this project working with them?
I think it was very relaxing, and the reason why the image looks quite good is we had to there was quite a lot of revisions, because the client had a very specific image in mind, of course, because they were coming up with the story, and they had this very specific city in mind, and since it's their story, of course they want it to be perfect. So there was a lot of going back and forth with iterations, And the good thing about using 3D is that if they want a different camera angle, let's say if I would do this all in 2D, I have to go back into Photoshop and do it all over again. But with 3D, I can just rotate the camera angle ever so slightly, and suddenly you have a new image. So a lot of the experimenting part and a lot of the back and forth part was in 3D. So what we tried to do is nail down the design in 3D, and once that was all fine and finished, I would finish the image in 2D. So there wasn't a lot of revisions in the Photoshop part, in the actual painting part.
So once you were done in 3D and then you took it into 2D, how long did that process take to kind of clean up the environment and add the effects you wanted to add?
That didn't take long at all, actually. I think the project in total took about 3 days from start to finish, and that's including starting to sketch on paper and then going into 3D, experimenting in there, having client feedback, and then the final image. So the final image was created in about a day, and that's to say I take a render from 3D, so I render it out in high resolution, and then I start painting over it to hide all of the the hard edges and angles that 3D gives you. And that process took about 8 hours. So I just wake up in the morning and start working, and it's a very relaxing way of working because I've already nailed the design down in 3D. I've already made all of the decisions like composition, lighting, perspective is already solved in 3D. So the whole painting process is a very, meditative, relaxing way of working, and that took about a day.
So with a piece like this, what's your typical workflow?
So I'm kind of known for having a very specific workflow, which is pretty handy because you have a very reliable way of working, which is good for client work because time is always an issue. So I always start working in 3D. Actually, I almost never start like with working in 2D and sketching that way. I always start working like a box of Legos by stacking a bunch of bricks on top of one another. But what I did in this piece is I tried to hand paint some textures in 2D and transfer that to 3D to create more of this painterly feeling. So what I did is I grabbed a texture of an oil painting and I heavily adjusted that to look like almost like a grass kind of structure or texture. And then I imported that into 3D, to make the whole thing look more painterly. And what I also did is I took the black and white values that came with the texture, and I used that to create something that is called a displacement map. And what that does is it creates kind of an elevation or a kind of a height difference based on the black and white values in your texture. So what happened is suddenly I got from like a very, very angular or like very simple looking 3D shape. I went from that into a very elaborate kind of landscape because of because of all the values in my my photo texture gave me so much information. And now suddenly I have this very dense landscape. And what happens now is that I almost have to work the other way around. So usually artists, they start with a little sketch and then they turn it into a finished piece. So work from little detail to a lot of detail. And at this point, I have a lot of detail and I have to work the other way around. So, here's this super dense city, and now I have to turn it into a painting that looks appealing and not too, confusing or not too dense or noisy to the eye. So I actually have to remove some of that detail. And it's a pretty interesting workaround because I have the composition already and the lighting, and now it's just a matter of making the image look appealing and creating some areas where the eye of the audience can actually rest, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting that you work in that way. So you actually have a lot of detail in 3D and then you kind of almost polish it out by painting over it.
Yeah.
Do most 3D artists work in this way?
I'm pretty sure they do, especially concept artists, because you're working with like a lot of time constraints and like very tight deadlines. And 3D can like really help you cut away a lot of this like tedious like drawing and painting work, because you can already figure out the composition and the perspective and the lighting in 3D. So I'm pretty sure a lot of environment concept artists like me, they use 3D to create interesting shapes or figure out perspective, because drawing perspective by hand can be pretty tedious and pretty hard. And yeah, the good thing about 3D is that it's based on math, so it's already solved for you. A lot of my work features like architecture or gigantic buildings, and scale usually plays like a big role. And the thing is, with all of my illustrations, they might have this 2D look, but the structures might look very elaborate. And actually all of that stuff comes from the 3D part. So it's usually a lot of experimenting with a bunch of tools like there's a tool, for example, like the cloner tool, which allows you to copy a shape over and over. And maybe you have a cube here and you rotate it and like it winds up and becomes this beautiful, I don't know, piece of architecture, or like a very sci-fi looking tower. So yeah, a lot of those intricate shapes come from 3D and not necessarily the 2D part, because drawing some of those shapes by hand would require a lot of knowledge of perspective and like a very strong design sense. And since, you know, we're always on a tight deadline, you need to, you know, use all of the shortcuts that you can use. And since I started learning 3D before I even started learning 2D, I never did that much drawing as a kid. I was more of these, you know, I played with Legos a lot. So actually a lot of my design thinking comes from working in 3D and not like working like a painter or working in watercolor, for example.
So Leon, thank you so much for being part of the Let's Talk Art series, and I've really enjoyed talking about your work. Where can people find you online?
All right, thank you so much. It was an absolute pleasure. People can find me on ArtStation or maybe on Instagram, and my Instagram is @LeonLikesSpaceships.
Amazing. I can't wait to see what you do next.